The Politicrat is brought to you by the great people at Anchor. Anchor is such a great place to go if you want to get started in podcasting, and it's easy and it's free. Anchor, marvelous stuff, marvelous. And I'm so grateful to the folks at Anchor for getting me going with The Politicrat. If you want to get going and be heard on Apple, on Spotify, and everywhere podcasts can be, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Nearly 10,000 more Americans will die. 90,000 deaths and growing. Millions more will file for unemployment. Small businesses are dying. We're not testing enough. It's still spreading. Here's what else is coming this week. He will lie to you over and over. He will tweet instead of lead. He will blame others for his failures. Welcome to this week, and the next week, and the next, and the next, until you do something about it. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Welcome to another edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Wednesday, May the 20th, 2020. That ad was from the Lincoln Project, as you heard. It's the latest ad, as of at least this past Monday, on Donald Trump destroying this country, as he has done. The United States of America is no longer a recognizable country that supposedly stands for the ideals that it had supposedly been founded upon. Now, for many years, we know that this country has not lived up to any of the ideals that it has promoted in a great many ways. We see this with all kinds of injustices in the criminal justice system in this country and elsewhere, in terms of elsewhere in the infrastructure of the country. We are now both hated and pitied. We are also mocked in other countries because of the zero leadership of Donald Trump. He does not intend to lead. He never intended to lead. He only intended to steal and avoid prison. And this November, American voters, you have a unique opportunity to do something that 52 Republican senators did not do back in February. And that is to put the kibosh on Donald Trump and this administration, to end the criminality that's running rampant in the White House, the stealing, the grifting, the funneling trillions of dollars to the 1%, the billionaire class. You, dear voter in the United States, have a unique responsibility and a unique opportunity to kick this administration and its orange menace to the curb. Circle your calendars for November the 3rd, 2020. Are you going to vote? Have you registered to vote? Have you checked your voter registration? These are the questions that should be asked. These are the questions that you should be asking yourself, quite frankly. there are primaries still going on in this country. I know some people would not believe that, but the truth is that they are still going on. We had one in Kansas recently. We've had one in Nebraska recently. There have been primaries going on for the last few weeks and months. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic coverage has blanketed really most of any coverage about anything else, as the corporate news media is looking to maximize its ratings on cable television. So unfortunately, a lot of news is not made available to you in the US unless you go online and you happen to read some newspapers online. And then you will see a treasure trove of news that will not be shown to you on television. And yet most people, if they have televisions in this country, are sitting in front of them now while they are in their shelter-in-place advisories at home. That is, if they have a roof over their head. By the way, speaking of news that hasn't been probably widely broadcasted to you on TV at all, especially if you're living outside of New York State, is that yesterday the state Supreme Court upheld the ruling of the federal court judge. There was an appeals court, It may have been the Court of Appeals, because that's the highest court in New York State, is the Court of Appeals. And they have just yesterday upheld a judge's decision to make the Democratic presidential primary in New York State continue and go on as first scheduled for later next month. I think it's June 26th, sometime like that, late in the month of June, 23rd or 26th. But the New York Board of Elections had been saying, no, we don't want this Democratic primary because the coronavirus is going to ravage us. And my goodness me, we already know that Joe Biden is the nominee. Well, by the way, Joe Biden is not the nominee. He still has not reached the 1,991 delegates that are required in order to become officially the Democratic presidential nominee. He is the presumptive nominee because it is expected that he will reach that threshold, and he certainly is closer to reaching it than Bernie Sanders is. And the argument that the Board of Elections was making is, well, Bernie Sanders he's dropped out, and there's a coronavirus pandemic going on, and therefore, even though we won't, therefore we can just shut this down, and we don't even need to have a Democratic presidential primary. Forget about it. Is a virus going around, and we can't have that. Even though we've got these local elections going on, we can keep those we can continue those because those are contested races. And initially, that was what the Board of Elections decided. Then that was appealed. And Justice Analisa Torres said, you've got to be out of your mind. You cannot pick and choose which elections in your state you're going to have and not have. And therefore, there is no reason, given the fact that the virus is not going to somehow skip around your local races, to now cancel the Democratic presidential primary. So she ordered that the primary go on with both, obviously, Joe Biden's name and Bernie Sanders' name on the ballot. That was recently appealed by the New York Board of Elections, and as I just said, yesterday, the appeals court came down with their ultimate decision, their ultimate verdict, which was, we affirm the decision of the federal court judge. These primaries are going to go on, and the Democratic presidential primary in New York State is going to go on next month between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And that was the right decision. It makes a whole lot of sense as far as I'm concerned. It is important that in these times of people in the White House doing everything they can to completely eliminate any semblance of democracy that there is left in this country, and some would say there never has been any democracy in the United States, that we make sure that voting is available. We have seen recently that a number of states have said that they will be sending out ballots, vote by mail ballots, to every voter in their state. Just about 10 days or so ago, California Governor Gavin Newsom became the first governor in the country to formally announce that his state would be mailing vote-by-mail ballots to every voter in the state, regardless of whether the voter is a vote-by-mail ballot voter or not. Given this pandemic, we've seen what's happened in Wisconsin, of course, and that was the genesis for this because, of course, as you know, in Wisconsin last month, speaking of court battles, the Republican Wisconsin state legislature had said to the Republican-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court, look, this Democratic governor in Wisconsin, in our state, has the nerve to say that we should close the state down and only do vote-by-mail balloting and not in person. And of course, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, controlled by the Republicans, sided, of course, with the Republican legislature and overruled and overturned the executive order by Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers, the Democrat in the state. And of course, as you know, they had in-person voting during a pandemic. At least 52 people, according to local reports in Wisconsin, had been infected since that vote. It is not known specifically whether or not those 52 people who were infected as a result of standing in long lines for over 2 hours with very little social distancing as they waited to vote, if they got the virus from that experience or if they did not. But I dare say that it did not help. So California is seeing that. And by the way, Wisconsin did a really good thing. They got rid of a judge, a conservative judge named Daniel Kelly, who is an extremist, right-wing conservative that Donald Trump was exhorting and endorsing and praising. And thankfully, voters put their lives on the line. I hate to say that they should even be doing that because they shouldn't. But because of the Republican state legislature, because of the Republican-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court, they were forced to do that. And the voters in Wisconsin on April 7th rejected Daniel Kelly, and they voted in Jill Karofsky as the Supreme Court Justice in Wisconsin, which meant that the majority 5-2 Republican Wisconsin Supreme Court would now be a majority Republican Wisconsin Supreme Court of 4 judges to 3, with an opportunity in the next year or two to change the dynamics because 2 other judges will be up for election in Wisconsin in the next couple of years, if not both in 2021. So it's a very good chance that in the next year or two, we could see a complete reversal in that Wisconsin Supreme Court, and we could have a democratically controlled court there, which would be huge. Wisconsin is definitely one of those states that is going to be at the focal point of a lot of these battles. And you're seeing that now with Michigan as well. You're seeing it with Michigan. You're seeing it with Wisconsin. And those are going to be two of the very important states. You're seeing it to a degree in Ohio as well. Michigan, of course, has had some very vile demonstrators. I put those words, demonstrators, in quotes, that word in quotes. By the way, Michigan did the right thing and yesterday said that it, through the Secretary of State there, would be mailing out ballots for vote by mail to every voter in the state for both the August and November elections. The August election, I believe, is a primary or special ballot. I'm not quite sure. And I did speak to the journalist Susan Demas a couple of weeks ago. She, of course, is the editor-in-chief of the Michigan Advance, a progressive newspaper that follows the events in the Michigan legislature and the politics across Michigan very closely. And I did talk about the August and November elections. Well, since that conversation yesterday, the Michigan Secretary of State announced that the state would be mailing out vote-by-mail ballots to every voter in the state of Michigan ahead of the August election and November elections, which I think is a really smart thing to do. I think every state should be doing this. And I know there's been some growing concern about the U.S. Postal Service and the funding, and that there's a good chance, a very good chance, unfortunately, that by September, we may have a either diminished, reduced, or completely obsolete postal service. That is not beyond the realm of possibility. So we've got to, again, keep the fight going to make sure that the post office does not go down the toilet and that there is funding for it. The House passed a bill last Friday. I've spoken about that bill, which was in part including funds beyond the $10 billion that Donald Trump and Steve Mnuchin had offered the post office on a leveraging basis. The Postal Service had been funded. I think it was at least $50 billion in that bill, maybe 26 to 50 billion, I'm not sure. That bill was passed last Friday in the House. No indication yet that the Senate's even taking it up. Mitch McConnell has strongly waved the possibility of that off. And I think, as I've said before, for those of you in Kentucky, you really should think about voting for Amy McGrath. Not even think about it. You should vote for her. Amy McGrath is a decorated military veteran. She is someone who is a leader and has the credentials, the strength, the foresight and the wisdom and the principle and the toughness to lead Kentucky forward. And I think she would do a darn good job in the Senate, in the United States Senate, representing the state of Kentucky. I mean, the two clowns that are in that Senate from that state, I mean, the bar has been set real low. And I know that Amy McGrath would far exceed the pathetic, non-existent leadership of Rand Paul, who loves to spread coronavirus, apparently, and call Dr. Fauci out to be someone somehow less than his great credentials show. And Mitch McConnell, who is up to his eyeballs in criminality, along with his wife, Elaine Chao. You can go and look that up, by the way. Elaine Chao and her business interests and her companies back in Hong Kong and China and in various areas where she is not up to any good, and nor is Mitch McConnell, the emperor of criminality. He likes the words Grim Reaper because, of course, all the things that the House pass in the House over the last 2 years now, almost a year and a half. The 500 plus pieces of legislation, almost all of it has withered and died on the desk of the Grim Reaper. But this guy is up to his eyeballs in criminality, if you ask me. In fact, you don't have to ask me. You can just go and do a quick search on Mitch McConnell, who arguably has done as much damage as Donald Trump has done to the mechanisms of American government. There would be a close race between the two of them for that title if you wanted to give out a title for that. And here's your prize for destroying America. Da-da-da. Both of these guys are menaces, and both of these guys must be removed from office this November. So some states are doing this. Some states are sending vote-by-mail ballots to every voter. And some of that's difficult because some people, and I hope they're doing this with postage free, because it would not be right to expect that people need to go pay and buy stamps, even though the Postal Service could use some support. But there are people who won't be able to go and buy stamps, especially if they're in the midst of a lockdown. How are they going to buy stamps? Some might say, well, you can buy them online or something, but people don't have internet access. What are they going to do? People don't have computers. Some people don't. There's loads of people in the United States who don't have a computer. What are they going to do? They don't have a printer. What are they going to do? They don't have a smartphone. They have a phone, but it's not a smartphone. So what are they going to do? These are things to take account of. Speaking of what are they going to do, when I come back, I will address what you can do and what you must do this November.
The coronavirus.
This is their new hoax. We have it totally under control. One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear. When you have 15 people, and within a couple of days it's going to be down to close to zero, we really think we've done a great job in keeping it down to a minimum. I like this stuff. I really get it. We've done one hell of a job. Nobody's done the job that we've done. No, I don't take responsibility at all.
Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this ad.
He doesn't take any responsibility. But this November, we must take responsibility at the ballot box. I don't think that many people are going to be sitting this election out here in the United States. There really is something at stake. Not only is this country at stake, but I actually think that your life is at stake. I really do. There is going to be, I think, a lot of intimidation and threats. We are already seeing this from these mobs of people who are clamoring around state capitals of Democratic governors predominantly, and making all kinds of terroristic threats, death threats, particularly in Lansing, Michigan. I've spoken about this. The assaults, the parade of people with nooses and swastikas and Confederate battle flags and racist chanting and misogynist chanting and death threats against Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. It's just evil, vile stuff. There is a report, and I've written about this, by the way, at one of the new locations that I write at It's called More Thoughts. My last name, Moore, Thoughts, THOUGHTS. The web address for that, the URL, is more, that's MOORE, .substack.com. That's more, MOORE, .substack, SUBSTACK.com. You will be able to find my writings, or at least some of my writings, which I've decided to put there, brand new writings, by the way, on that web address, that URL, along with episodes of the Politicrat podcast. And you will be able to find all of those in that location. And you can subscribe. Would really appreciate that. Please, it's free of charge. If you just subscribe, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. And it was in More Thoughts that I wrote about this issue of these mobs in Michigan. And we're seeing this. We're seeing this in Michigan in particular, and in other places, but especially in Michigan. And you're seeing these mobs, violent people. You know, again, it's a small minority of people, though, but it's very, very loud. They represent about 2 or 3% of the state of Michigan, or even less than that, quite frankly. And the news media has given them a big platform to scream and shout, and they are gleefully taking it in, but with deadly consequences. I mean, there have been threats and death threats at least being made. You've had people with their guns in the Senate gallery in Michigan, prompting a cancellation of the order of business in the Senate. I mean, the legislature closed down. There is nothing smart that comes out of having an open carry state and then allowing people to bring those weapons, loaded or not, into a Senate chamber where politicians are conducting business. Nothing smart or good can come out of a situation like that. What could possibly go wrong? Guns, politicians, angry, racist, misogynist people who are Trump supporters, who don't like the Democrats or don't like Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who is also a Democrat. And what can possibly go wrong there? So I talk about this, and there's a really disturbing, and I link to it with a warning that there's some really distressing stuff. And there were these threats against the governor in Michigan. And I'm certainly not going to repeat them, but I link to it in the article at more.substack.com, More Thoughts. It's really distressing stuff. If you don't want to read that link or click on it, I can completely understand. It's a story that goes into very graphic detail about some of the threats that were being shouted at or tweeted out or Facebooked to the governor, or at least about the governor of Michigan. It's really ugly stuff. So I do think that Trump is whipping up these groups, these 2% or 1% of populations in some of these states, with the Liberate Michigan, the Liberate Minnesota, Liberate Virginia, Second Amendment, right? I mean, he is absolutely ginning up the pitchfork mob from Charlottesville, the tiki torch carrying mob that he called very good people, the Nazis that he likes, because Nazi Germany is here. As far as I'm concerned, I know people who are Jewish who are telling me that. Here in 2020, I am not speaking out of turn. Jewish people, some of them, have told me this. In their view, Nazi Germany is here right now in the United States. I've been of that opinion for the last several months. And as a matter of fact, there will be some people who listen to this who may say that the Nazis have never left this country. Whether the rally from the 1930s at Madison Square Garden shows that or not. There was a Nazi rally in the 1930s in Madison Square Garden. There's been a documentary made on it. It's 8 minutes long. In New York City, 20,000+ people, Nazis, crammed in to hold their convention in Madison Square Garden in New York, where, by the way, in New York City, where, by the way, the Jewish population there, I think, is the largest in any city in the world outside of the state of Israel. Outside of Israel. Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine the specter of Nazis packing Madison Square Garden? Then, back then in the 30s, and now or any time? We've got to do something about this. When you're calling Nazis very fine people, when you are praising these protesters as good people, like he did in Michigan, like he did on Long Island last week, this kind of thuggery has to come to an end. And I think this November, what we have to do is vote. Whether you're voting from home with a vote by mail and you mail in the ballot, or whether you are one of the people who will risk going through standing on a line in some of these states because they will close these precincts like these Republican-controlled states love to do, especially when you're dealing with trying to suppress and steal votes like the Republicans will be doing this November. You should get out there and vote if you feel the need, and if you are not afraid. It's not even about feeling the need, it's about you should do it. If your state somehow does not offer vote by mail voting right now, you should be writing to the governor, writing to the Secretary of State, and begging for that. You should also probably call your senators and local representatives, particularly your local representatives and your congressperson. But I would especially say the governor, the Secretary of State, and your local politicians should be contacted about that and put pressure on them and tell them we all need vote by mail ballots. There is no excuse not to do it, particularly with a pandemic that is supposed to rage again, this virus here in the U.S., and it's still going on. The virus has not stopped. Just because states are doing the crazy thing and reopening again, and I think reopening way too soon. I'm not saying you should stay closed forever. But just because you're seeing these states reopen now, that does not mean this virus is over with. In fact, this virus is still killing hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people daily. We are now over 93,000 people dead in the United States. By far, the most people dead from this virus anywhere in the world. And we are going to exceed that number by a long way. I have always said that the number is probably twice as much as what we are being told. And I think that there is at least close to a quarter of the population infected with this virus. So you do the math, out of 330 million people, if a quarter of them are infected, you know what we're talking about here. We're talking close to 80, if not more, 80 million people. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about just over 80 million people, potentially, I think, that are infected with this virus. You've got to account for all the people who are asymptomatic. You've got to account for the fact that we've only tested 10 million people in this country out of 330 million. You've got to take into account that there are lots of people who don't want to get tested because they don't have health insurance and they know that they're going to have to pay money that they don't have. You're going to have to factor in the stay-at-home principle, where people are told to shelter in place, stay at home. You're going to have to factor in people who are too ill to leave their homes. You're going to have to factor in people who were told that if they didn't have symptoms that were life or death symptoms, that they had to stay home. You're going to have to factor in people who did not want to go to the hospital or to any doctor for fear that they were going to be deported. You've got to factor in the homeless. You've got to factor in detainees and prisoners. There's so many people that we don't know about, that we're not hearing about, who I think have this virus. And so many more people who have died from it than we're being told. This virus has not gone away, and it would be really foolish to act as if it had. And so that's why vote by mail is very important, because if Dr. Redfield of the CDC is saying that this virus is likely to come back a lot stronger come the fall, that's September or October, and hey, presto, November, along with the flu, that's a wicked and dangerous 1-2 punch. It seems like a perfect storm of cruelty to come. But we need to vote. We need to vote. And so I would say right now, if you have access to a computer and you have access to the internet and if you have a smartphone, go to I Will Vote, iwillvote.com. Check to see if you are registered. Check your voter registration, and I would check it periodically, twice a month. I would also register to vote, and you can do that at iwillvote.com. You can also try rockthevote.org, and you can also try whenweallvote.org. All three of those are places where you can register to vote online, where you can also check your voter registration. And if for some reason you are finding that you have not been registered, make sure you contact your Board of Elections in your state. Make sure that you contact the Secretary of State's office if you can in your state. Check the Board of Elections in your county actually as well, because that's really where you want to go to make sure that you are properly accounted for. There are websites for every Board of Elections in every county in this country, or certainly every state in the country. You should be able to find that. You can do a quick search engine search for that information. So now is the time to develop the plan. Donald Trump is sitting there and telling you, oh, Michigan, oh, they're sending out ballots to 7 million, 8 million voters, blah, blah, blah. It's illegal. It's not illegal. Michigan is entitled, just like every other state in the country is, to send ballots by mail, certainly in the interests of public health and safety, to protect people. Democracy should not require that people risk their lives to exercise democracy. Now, Lord knows many people died for the right to vote in this country, or at least for the right to go to the ballot box, because there is no constitutional right to vote in this country. There is just a right to not have your vote denied based on race or national origin or gender or any of those types of classifications that have been made. We need, quite frankly, a constitutional right to vote so that we don't see these shenanigans going on that the Republicans are carrying out like they did here in California with ballot harvesting. It's incredible that that is allowed in this state. It's the only state in the country where it is allowed. Ballot harvesting is the act of you as a poll person. Let's say that you're collecting signatures, and you decide to say to someone you knock on the door of at their home, hey, look, you know what? I can fill out that ballot for you. Just tell me what you want me to fill out and I'll do it. And then I'll take that ballot to the Board of Elections for you. Oh, you're elderly? Oh, you have a disability of some kind? Well, I can make it easy for you. I can take that ballot from you and I'll take it down to the office for you. You don't have to. Well, you know, what could possibly go wrong there? And so with ballot harvesting, what Republicans have been doing and what they have been doing for years is throwing away ballots that voters, particularly here in California, have been trusting them with. If you are trusting them with that, it's typically people who are older, who are elderly, who are more vulnerable, who trust the word of these people who say that they are poll workers or poll people for a certain candidate or other. And if that ballot turns out to be something that is opposite to whichever candidate that the poll person who's there recommends or represents, then they throw the ballot in the garbage. They never take it back to the Board of Elections office, the local precinct. They never take it back there, or they manipulate it and change it after you've tried to fill it out, to the extent that that happens. And it does happen. And then they spoil the ballot so that that ballot isn't cast, or they just destroy it. They just collect the ballots, throw them in the garbage. So dozens and dozens, and if not hundreds or more votes never get to see the light of day because someone has decided to manipulate and take advantage of people who are very vulnerable. So I say now it is time for us to vote. It is time for us to have a plan. Donald Trump is out here saying, oh no, Michigan can't do this, Michigan can't do that. He is setting the stage, as he has done for the last 3.5 years, for saying that the whole election is rigged, the whole election is stolen. That's what he's doing, folks. Donald Trump is setting you up with this, oh my goodness me, they're manipulating the results, they've manipulated them, there's no way. All these people who voted, it's illegal, it's illegal. Remember a few weeks ago when he was giving one of his campaign rally press conferences, and he hasn't really stopped that. And he said, well, you know, vote by mail is very dangerous. I don't like it. I don't like it. It's really bad. They steal the mail. They steal it. There's all these things you can do with the mail and steal it. Then the reporter said, but sir, you vote by mail, don't you? Yes, I do, actually, because, hey, I'm not in Florida, so I vote by mail, of course. But you've just said that it's illegal. Well, blah, blah. This is the game he is playing. He played this game after he stole the election in 2016. This is after he stole it and was declared the winner and was saying things like, oh, there were 3 million people in California that weren't supposed to vote. They have voted illegally. In fact, they're illegals. They're illegals and they're not supposed to vote. And 3 million people in California, those 3 million people voted illegally. No evidence of it. No proof. Nothing. And of course, he lied. He propagandized. He gaslighted. There was no 3 million people illegally voting in California, and he knows that. He knows it well. What he is doing and what he continues to do is to prime you mentally, to tweak you mentally, so that when Joe Biden absolutely eviscerates him this November with your help, he will say, "Oh, I told you all along. I told you it was rigged. I told you." This is who you're dealing with. And I think it's time for us all to stop the clown show. The clown show isn't funny. The clown show has killed almost 100,000 people in this country. And I think we are past the point of using excuses anymore. We are past the point of justifications. We are past the point of putting up with this nonsense and filth and criminality. It's got to stop. And I think right now, the most important thing is to make sure you are registered to vote, is to make sure that you have registered to begin with, and make sure that you communicate with other people on your next Zoom conference. Register to vote. You don't even have to mention the name Donald Trump. Just tell people, register to vote, and be done with it. Because that's what we have to do in this country before we never ever get a chance to vote again. Because if this guy were to somehow win, or steal rather, the election this November, and the Republicans are behind the scenes right now trying to take millions of people off the voting rolls, we may never get to vote again. So this November, we must vote as if our lives depended upon it. Thanks for listening. This has been The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.